Hey, welcome back, everybody. Okay, so whether it's online, at the dinner table, maybe perhaps even at the office, there are a lot more conversations happening about diversity, social equality. But the thing is, when people's views or opinions differ, things could get heated.
Our next guest has had these types of heated discussions both on television and around the world. She urges us to lower our defensive in her latest book, Don't Label Me: How to Do Diversity Without Inflaming the Culture Wars. Author and diversity educator Irshad Manji joins us today. So lovely to see you.
And right back at you both. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This is going to be such a cool, interesting conversation. And I want to start with what you kind of really posit in the book, which is you say we need to engage in more honest
Yep.
diversity, which is an interesting way to put it. So I'd like to ask you, we begin with what is dishonest
Hmm.
about the way that we are currently approaching and discussing the topic of diversity?
Great question. Here's the bottom line. Too often, diversity amounts to labeling. And labels reduce people to something less than we actually are. For example, I'm Muslim. Does that mean that I think the same way as every other Muslim? And by the way, does every other Muslim think the same way as every other Muslim? No. Diversity is dishonest if all we're doing is slicing and dicing individuals up and stuffing them into categories. Diversity is honest when we engage with people rather than merely assume stuff about them based on their labels.
Well, Irshad, you're no stranger to being labeled or having labels associated
Mm-hmm.
with you, and I'm sure to varying degrees of comfort level. But some people definitely adopt labels because they feel it makes them a part of a community. So, how do
Mm-hmm.
you draw the line between labels that help people and labels that limit people?
Hmm.
Great point. And I think in some ways you've actually answered your own question because when people are labeled by others, it can feel pretty condescending. But when you take labels on for yourself, you have made that choice. Similarly, though, you've got to remember that labels are not neutral, right? They come with baggage. People make assumptions about you and me based on the labels that we take for ourselves. So if you want people to know all of who you are, then you also want to invite questions from them. If you care to, ask me questions, and I'm not going to bite your head off just because you're curious.
So I think perhaps innate in humans is the idea we want to belong, we want to feel like we have our people, but what on the other side can come from that is perhaps an us versus them mentality. So let's talk about that.
You remember, of course, the infamous, now infamous, interview that Meghan Markle and Prince Harry did with Oprah. Most people completely glossed over something that Meghan Markle said. No matter what you think of her, there was something she said that was actually very valid. She said, look, if you love Kate, that's great. Doesn't mean you have to hate me. And if you love me, that's awesome. It doesn't mean you have to hate Kate. In other words,
Mm.
this either or approach that we human beings so easily take towards one another, right? I'm for free speech, therefore I'm against social justice. Or I'm for social justice, therefore I'm against free speech. No, you can have both. And we need to, liberate ourselves from this either or lens and truly appreciate that life offers us so many richer possibilities and options than one or the other. Let's adopt the and both perspective. That's
Mm.
when we really begin to understand one another in our full humanity.
What you're talking about is all about like embracing nuance and the sort of full spectrum of humanity and breaking open boxes. These are such wise insights. But difficult conversations are difficult for a reason. They're called difficult for a reason. But some people, that person that they are facing is not just virtual, they are literally sitting across the table from them. So,
Mhm.
do you have any tips about how to kind of make
Mm.
difficult conversations, especially with those who are close to us, as productive as possible?
I'm going to give you 5 quick free tips. You ready? One,
Yes.
take that deep breath. When you do that, you allow the primitive part of your brain to transition into the more evolved part of the brain, the part of the brain where emotion and rationality can coexist rather than emotion bulldozing reason out of the picture. So breathe deeply, number one. Number two, find common ground before you dive into your differences, because common ground builds trust. And without trust, we can't discuss our differences constructively. Tip number three, ask questions. You don't have to state right away where you're coming from. You can ask the other, your other, where they're coming from. And ask from a place of curiosity, not judgment. So none of this gotcha question stuff, okay? Like, be sincere when you're asking your questions. You can even say, for example, tell me what you think I'm missing about where you're coming from. Number four, listen. But here's the key. Listen to understand, not to win. Not every discussion has to become a debate. And in fact, the moment you turn it into a debate, listening goes out the window, because now there can only be one winner, right? And finally, ask one more round of questions. And I'm going to give you a really important tip here. You can start your second round by simply saying, tell me more. You could say, well, but why do you believe that? Even if you're sincere and you're coming from a place of curiosity, that can sound judgmental, right? No, tell me more. And watch the emotional defenses come down. Then you're ready to now tell them where you're coming from.
Okay, but Irshad, sometimes there is no common ground to be found with the person that you're having a discussion with. So how do you know when to just sort of walk away and when a conversation is just not worth the effort?
First of all, Cynthia, I fundamentally believe it's always worth the effort, because there's an ironclad, non-negotiable law of human psychology, which is, if you want to be heard, you must first be willing to hear. In other words, if you go first in the listening department, you will set in motion the other person's ability to then also listen to you, right? So if you say, there's no point in doing this and I'm just going to walk away, well, you absolutely have the right to walk away. You absolutely do. But ask yourself, have I, created the culture of the conversation in a way that allows both of us to be heard? Notice that you're actually claiming your power, not giving it up, when you lead by listening.
Let's discuss the idea of who carries the burden to educate whom about the issues of equality and social justice and diversity and inclusion, because a lot of people believe, it shouldn't be those who are marginalized and oppressed. It shouldn't be their job then to educate the dominant culture about their own oppression. But you don't necessarily fully agree with that. Why not?
So if you are somebody who wants change in society, think of yourself as an entrepreneur who's got a message to sell. Now, if you want me to change and you are berating me and ridiculing me and telling me that it's not your job to inform me about anything I'm curious about, are you going to, as an entrepreneur, get my business? Probably not, because you've been humiliated in the process, right? We've got to remember that how we treat the potential buyer is at least as important as what we are trying to sell. And by the way, I hear you about the emotional burden, but here's the other thing to remember. If you're tired, if you're not into it right now, if you just need to, walk away, as Cynthia said earlier, do that. So there are always choices that we can make. But the key here is when we treat others with respect, we are in turn going to be treated with respect. It's got to start with us.
This has just been so enlightening on every level. What a pleasure to have you with us today on the show.
Well, thank you so much, ladies. And, I think that we can all be better role models for each other. You're leading the way. Go get them.
Oh, thank you. Listen, you're doing it yourself. The book, it is called Don't Label Me. It is available everywhere. We'll be back after this.